Chosen one, tell me something. Have you ever looked at your left hand and felt like it was holding a secret that even your mind couldn't explain? Like something invisible was written into your very flesh, a presence, a mark, a memory that somehow kept death from touching you? This isn't a coincidence. It never was. There is a reason why, out of millions, you were the one who survived, the one who walked away, the one who kept breathing when everything else collapsed, the one who, even if no one saw it, was pulled back from the edge again and again, like a soul being cradled by something sacred that refuses to let go. And now you're here, still alive, still searching, still wondering why. But deep inside, you already know. You felt it. That pressure on your chest before something tragic almost happened. That voice that whispered, "Don't go," and saved you. That exact second, so subtle, yet so precise when reality shifted and time bent just enough for you to be spared. You know, you carry something rare, something ancient, something one in a million carries. A sacred mark, spiritual, invisible, eternal, embedded not just on your body, but within your existence. But here's the truth, no one ever told you out loud. This mark is not a decoration. It's a warning to darkness and a seal of your assignment. That's why death has come close, but never crossed the line. Because heaven drew that line long before you knew who you were. And if you're still listening now, it's because something inside you is stirring. Because this message is not meant for many, it's meant for the one. You. So let me be completely clear. This video is not for entertainment. It's not a story. It's a revelation. A spiritual truth hidden beneath your survival. And if you've ever escaped something that should have taken your life, if your heart beat through fire, through despair, through physical threat and mental collapse, then this is the moment where your soul stops surviving and starts remembering. Because what's coming next will explain everything from the pain you never understood to the battles you fought in silence to the reason your left hand is not ordinary. There is something marked upon you, and once you know what it means, nothing in your life will remain the same. But first, do something sacred. Comment 777 below if you know this message was sent to you. If your spirit feels it, if your bones remember. Let the spiritual world know, I'm awake, I remember, I'm one in a million. And if this is the first time you felt seen in a long time, subscribe now, not to follow a channel, but to stay aligned with the frequency that's calling you home. Because this story isn't over, it's just beginning. And the real reason death couldn't have you, you're about to find out. You've probably heard it before, you're lucky to be alive. Maybe they said it after the accident, after the diagnosis, after the breakdown. Maybe you've said it to yourself, staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., wondering how you're still breathing when everything inside of you once wanted to stop. But let's be clear, you were never lucky. You were chosen, you were coded, and the mark you carry, whether the world sees it or not, is not decorative. It is spiritual technology. It's a divine encryption etched into the timeline of your life that triggers divine interference every time death tries to reach for you before the appointed time. This is why some people around you fell and you remained. Why some didn't make it through storms you were thrown into, but you walked out of them transformed. Why you kept getting another chance, even when you didn't ask for it. Because heaven didn't authorize your departure. Because your breath is still holding data that the earth hasn't received yet. The pattern is there, written all over your past. But most people never notice it. The enemy will call it coincidence. The world will call it luck. But those who are awake know better. Your escapes were not random, they were part of a design. There were delays you didn't understand, decisions that didn't make sense at the time, detours that saved your life, even when they looked like failure. And now you can see it. The invisible hand that kept pulling you back from destruction wasn't blocking your life, it was protecting your timeline. Because there are things inside you that still need to be released into this world. You were protected, not because of perfection, but because of purpose. And that protection didn't start when you became conscious of it. It began long before you had language for spirituality, before you could pray, before you could understand right from wrong. Because the code within you, that rare spiritual frequency, was embedded before you arrived here. It's why some doors never opened. It's why some people couldn't stay. It's why death brushed your shoulder but never held your hand. You are not a survivor by accident. You are a living interruption to the enemy's plan. And your continued presence on this earth is proof that the assignment placed within you still breathes. But that's only the surface. Because the first attempt to take you out happened much earlier than you remember. And what happened back then will explain why your life has felt like a war ever since the beginning. You didn't start this war. It started the moment you arrived. Even if your earliest memories are scattered or foggy, your spirit remembers the weight, the tension, the unexplainable heaviness that seemed to follow you even as a child, the fear you couldn't name, the sadness that had no cause, the dreams that felt too real, and the strange awareness that even adults around you never understood. Because you weren't born into ease. You were born into conflict. And not the kind visible to the world, not always, but the kind that unfolds in the unseen, where energies recognize energies. And from the moment your soul entered this realm, darkness recognized you, not by your behavior, not by your body, but by your frequency. The light you carried was already disruptive. The mark was already glowing faint to human eyes, but loud in the spirit. That's why the first attempt came so early. For some, it was in the womb, a threatened pregnancy, a near miscarriage, a trauma passed through bloodlines. For others, it came in infancy or early childhood, strange illnesses, accidents that no one could explain, environments too hostile for a soul as sensitive as yours. Abuse, neglect, emotional abandonment, or perhaps the opposite, being seen too much, too early, and expected to carry weight you weren't yet ready to hold. These weren't ordinary hardships. They were strategic assaults, targeted moves by forces that knew what you would become if you ever remembered who you were. Because the enemy doesn't wait for you to mature. It doesn't wait for you to find your voice. It tries to take you out before your roots go deep, before your soul learns how to defend itself. It strikes when you're most vulnerable and often when no one else is looking. And the saddest part is, you may have blamed yourself. You may have wondered, even as a child, what's wrong with me? You may have thought you were too sensitive, too weird, too broken, but you weren't broken. You were marked. You were different. And that difference made you a threat. That's why you feel so out of place. That's why people projected things onto you that didn't belong to you. That's why your inner world was always louder than the outer one, because you were already attuned to realms others couldn't sense. And even though you didn't understand it back then, something was already fighting for you. You see, that first escape, the one you might not even remember, wasn't just a brush with danger. It was a declaration from heaven. This one will not be taken. While you were still unaware of your calling, the spiritual realm was already responding to it. Angels stood guard. Ancestors interceded. And the timeline that held your mission was locked in place. You weren't supposed to survive that early attack, but you did. And the moment you did, something opened. A gate, a thread, a sequence of divine interruptions that would unfold for the rest of your life. You were never just a child. You were a vessel. And now, all the strange moments of your early life begin to make sense. But that was only the beginning. Because if darkness couldn't take you out physically, its next move would be far more subtle and far more dangerous. There is a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It whispers. It lingers. It doesn't crash into your life like a storm. It seeps in silently and begins to rearrange everything from the inside out. And one day, without even realizing how it started, you wake up empty. Not because you lost something outside of you, but because something inside you has been dying slowly, piece by piece. The light that once flickered begins to fade. The color drains from the world, and even though your heart is still beating, something deeper is sinking. This is the war no one sees. The collapse that happens behind smiles. The spiritual assassination that wears the face of exhaustion, depression, numbness, and silence. This wasn't a car crash. It wasn't a physical threat. This was psychological, emotional, energetic. This was darkness attempting to convince you that your existence was a burden, that your presence no longer mattered, that your light, the very thing that once set you apart, had become irrelevant. And perhaps, for a while, you believed it. You went through the motions, you showed up where you were expected, you laughed when required, but at night, you folded. At night, the silence became unbearable. At night, you begged for escape, even if you didn't say the words out loud. And nobody knew, because this kind of war doesn't leave visible bruises. But your spirit remembers. The nights you begged for peace, the days where the weight of existence felt too heavy, the breathless ache in your chest that had no medical explanation, the deep aching desire to disappear, not to harm anyone, but just to rest, just to stop feeling everything all at once. This was not weakness. This was a spiritual ambush, because the enemy realized you had survived the first war, the physical one, and now it shifted strategies. Not bullets, but beliefs. Not threats, but lies. Not visible danger, but inner erosion. And still, something in you refused to give in completely. Maybe it was a whisper you couldn't trace. Maybe a stranger's word, a song, a scripture, a random moment of beauty that pierced through the numbness. Maybe you woke up one day and, for no reason at all, felt just a little less heavy. That was no coincidence. That was divine interruption again. That was the unseen realm pulling you back from the edge. That was heaven responding not to your strength, but to your surrender. Because even if your prayers had no words, your tears carried a frequency that the spiritual world could not ignore. You didn't just survive. You returned, and you didn't return empty. You came back with wisdom, with depth, with spiritual gravity that can't be learned in books or sermons. You now walk with eyes that see through things, with a heart that recognizes hidden pain, with a sensitivity that feels like both a burden and a gift. And the most powerful part? Now that you've survived this level of silence, the enemy fears your voice more than ever, because what was supposed to break you became the thing that birthed your authority. But the war wasn't done. There was still one more attempt. And this time, death would try again, this time face to face. There comes a point in a chosen one's journey when the external war begins to quiet down, not because the attacks have stopped, but because the battlefield has shifted. The enemy, no longer able to touch your body without permission, begins to infiltrate your silence. And it is within that silence that the deadliest battle unfolds, one so subtle, so quiet, that no one around you notices you're even bleeding. You walk among the living, functioning, smiling, responding, even working, but something deep within has started to shut down. And the tragedy is not that others can't see it. The tragedy is that, for a time, neither can you. You simply begin to fade. Your thoughts grow heavy. Your energy feels thin. And the voice inside that once whispered dreams now only echoes questions you don't know how to answer. You start to feel like a ghost inside your own body, not because you're lifeless, but because something sacred within you has gone dim. This isn't sadness, it isn't stress, it is spiritual collapse, a kind of invisible disintegration where the soul begins to withdraw because it no longer sees a reason to remain fully here. And while the world tells you to push through, to stay positive, to keep going, they don't realize that this isn't about having a bad day. This is about feeling disconnected from the very meaning of your breath. It's about staring into the distance and wondering why you've survived so much if nothing inside you feels alive anymore. And so you begin to carry your life like a weight, a burden you can't explain, a fatigue that no rest can fix, a void that no achievement can fill. This is what happens when the war moves inside. It no longer tries to kill your body. It aims to convince you that you no longer matter. And in that place, that hollow, suffocating space between existing and vanishing, is where most chosen ones come closest to surrendering. Not with grand gestures or cries for help, but through slow spiritual erosion. You begin to doubt everything. Your worth, your identity, your calling, and worse, you begin to believe that maybe the world would keep spinning just fine without you. The enemy knows it cannot physically destroy what heaven has protected, So it changes strategy. It begins planting lies, quiet ones, insidious ones, lies that sound like your own voice, lies that drain you in places no medicine can reach, lies that build a prison inside your mind, where the only sound is the echo of your own silence. But here's the miracle. Even in that depth, even in that darkness where your words have collapsed into numbness, something ancient within you remained. A pulse, a whisper, a thread of light that refused to go out, even when everything else in you had already let go. Maybe it came in a moment of music, or a line in a book, or the unexpected presence of someone who didn't know they were sent. Maybe it was a prayer you never spoke out loud, or a tear that fell while you stared at the wall. But something even if you don't remember what found you there. And it didn't rescue you with noise. It didn't shout. It simply reminded you that your story wasn't finished yet. That divine presence didn't need your strength. It only needed your breath. And when you had no words to pray, no scripture to quote, no hope to fake, it responded anyway, not to what you said, but to what your soul carried in silence. That is how powerful the seal on your life is. The realm of spirit heard your pain as clearly as it hears your praise. The realm of light saw your internal collapse and responded not with punishment, but with preservation, because your mission is not fragile, and your purpose does not expire when your energy runs low. What you went through wasn't weakness. It was a sacred resistance, a spiritual war fought in the unseen, where every breath you took was defiance against the forces trying to erase you from the timeline. And now, because of that, you walk with an authority that cannot be explained, only felt. You carry a gravity that others notice, even if they can't name it. You sit in rooms and shift atmospheres without speaking, not because you're trying to be powerful, but because power was forged in you when you faced the void and didn't vanish. But the enemy wasn't finished yet. If it couldn't win in the soul, and it had already failed in the spirit, there remained one more attempt, the body. And what came next would take everything you had learned and test it in the most physical, undeniable, and terrifying way. There are moments in a chosen one's life when the veil between life and death thins to the point where you can feel it, not metaphorically, but tangibly. You see the danger coming. You hear the sound of finality approaching. Time slows. Breath catches. And for one eternal second, everything inside of you understands that you are standing in the space where some never return. The room feels colder. The world feels distant. And though your heart continues to beat, something around you seems to pause, as if heaven itself is holding its breath. That was the moment. The moment death tried again, this time not in thought or emotion, but in flesh and bone. Perhaps it was a violent accident, a health crisis that arrived like lightning, a moment of pure chaos, so visceral, so immediate, that all logic vanished and instinct took over. You might have felt your body weaken, your surroundings blur, your grip on reality slip. Or maybe you passed out, lost time, woke up surrounded by lights and hands trying to stabilize you. The doctors may have looked confused. The people around you may have said, "You're lucky to be alive." But in your soul, you knew better. It wasn't luck. It wasn't timing. It was intervention. Something spiritual stood between you and what was trying to erase you. Something sacred, something ancient. And though your body may carry scars from that moment, or your memory replays it over and over, searching for meaning, the truth is that what happened wasn't simply a tragedy avoided, it was a divine override. The natural laws bowed to a higher command. Reality bent to protect what had not yet been completed. The blood in your veins responded not only to medicine or hands or machines, but to a deeper order, one written long before your first breath. That's what happens when someone walks with divine authorization. Death can only come when heaven permits it, and in your case, permission was denied. Not because you were perfect, not because you had done everything right, but because the timeline of your destiny was still in motion. You still had people to reach, words to speak, rooms to enter that would shift because of your presence. There were still echoes waiting to be released from your voice, still prayers you hadn't prayed, still lives that would be affected just by the fact that you are still breathing. And so, in that moment, that final, terrifying, suspended moment, something spiritual activated, and where death saw opportunity, heaven declared, "Not this one." Not now. And when you returned, whether conscious or disoriented, calm or afraid, you were not the same. Something had changed. Your spirit had crossed the line, had stood face to face with the ending, and had been called back by purpose. And from that point forward, even if no one around you could understand, you carried something different, a weight, a knowing, a residue of something holy. It might show up in your eyes that look people can't explain, or in your silence, the kind that carries power without effort. It might show up in how animals react to you, or in how certain people become uncomfortable in your presence without knowing why. That's what happens when someone returns from the edge with unfinished glory still burning inside them. Your survival wasn't just for you. It was a message to the spirit realm that what was placed in you is still active, that no plan of darkness can override the breath God preserved. And though that moment may have left you shaken, it also left you sealed, because not everyone escapes the physical touch of death, but you did. And you carry the memory of it, not just in your mind, but in your very energy. And now you know. You know why the fear lingered. You know why the replay haunted you. You know why, after that moment, you couldn't go back to being the same person. You were touched by something eternal. You were caught mid-fall, pulled back through fire, returned to walk again, not randomly, not unfinished, but with new authority. But here's what you must now understand. If death failed to claim you, it wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning of the next chapter. Because once you've escaped what was meant to finish you, the only question that remains is, why were you spared? And that answer, chosen one, is written in what all three of your escapes were pointing to all along. So now, real chosen one, you didn't survive those moments by accident. You didn't walk out of wreckage, rise from inner collapse, or breathe again after the hand of death passed over you simply because you were lucky. The world may say it was fortune, that it wasn't your time, that you had more to do. But now you know something deeper, something only those who've stood on the edge of eternity can understand. It wasn't just that you weren't supposed to die, it's that your presence here carries a sacred instruction from heaven that has not yet been completed. You see, all along, your life has been speaking. Even when you were silent, even when you were broken, even when you forgot how to hope. Each escape, each return, each impossible survival was a page in a spiritual manuscript that began long before your birth. What they called coincidences were actually divine equations. What they labeled recovery was sacred restoration. What they thought was delay was protection from premature exposure. Because your calling, though hidden from many, has never been hidden from the one who marked you. You carry something within you that threatens the order of darkness. And that's not poetic exaggeration. That's why the attack started early. That's why your childhood was a battlefield. That's why the emotional collapse nearly silenced your light. That's why death itself circled you and had to leave empty-handed. Because there is something within your breath, your voice, your presence, something rare and not easily replaced that is meant to be activated in this exact time in history. But here's what most people never realize. Being spared doesn't just mean being saved, it means being sent. Every time you escaped, you were not just preserved, you were being positioned. Not for fame, not for applause, but for alignment. You were being aligned with your original assignment, the one hidden in your left hand, in your dreams, in your scars, and in your knowing. The mark you carry may not always be visible to others, but its frequency is undeniable in the spirit. The left hand, the place where covenant was made in ancient times, now pulses with the weight of something holy, something entrusted, not given. And now, that mark is awakening. That's why your spirit has felt restless. That's why the old ways no longer work. That's why your inner world has been rumbling like an unseen earthquake, because the season of surviving is over, and the season of remembering has begun. What you lived through wasn't a detour, it was your initiation. What almost killed you was the training ground for what you now carry. And the question is no longer, why did I survive? The question is, now that I know, what will I do with this life that was preserved? Because chosen ones don't live for comfort, they live for cause. And the cause that beats in your chest is not small, it is not safe, it is not passive, it is sacred, and it is time to let it speak. The mark on your left hand is not just symbolic, it is a key. And with that key, you have the power to unlock timelines in yourself and in others. You are a walking disruption to every lie spoken over your bloodline, a reversal of curses, a vessel of divine memory, and everything that tried to end you failed, not because of you, but because of the one who spoke over your life before you even entered the womb. And so now, chosen one, what remains? Action, not loud, showy action, but holy alignment. Begin moving like someone who knows they've been sent. Begin speaking like someone who remembers. Begin living like someone who carries sacred weight in every breath. The old version of you, the one who doubted, the one who hesitated, the one who apologized for existing, cannot walk with you where you're going. That version was buried in the ashes of your last escape. This version, the one still standing, is the proof of prophecy. So today, honor your survival by doing the one thing heaven has been waiting for. Stand in full awareness of who you are. And if your soul has been burning with confirmation throughout this message, if you feel the truth of these words vibrating in your very skin, then don't walk away in silence. Leave a comment below with the phrase, "I carry the mark." Let it be your agreement, your confirmation, your remembrance. And not just for you, but for others who are still searching, still doubting, still forgetting. Your voice might be the frequency that wakes them up. And if you haven't yet joined this sacred space, this global circle of chosen ones, remembering who they are, subscribe now, not because of content, but because you need to stay near the fire, near the message, near the alignment. We're building something here, not a platform, but a temple, a place where your story has always belonged. You didn't survive just to survive. You survived because heaven needs you alive. The mark on your left hand is speaking now. Listen and answer.